In part one, we explored the first three aspects of workflow. That this was the ordering of work. Almost it was a kind of meta work. That it was holistic, covering the whole spectrum of action, ranging from stimuli and moving all the way to desire, generation, clarification, and execution. And the whole spectrum of thought, drawing inspiration from thinkers and writers across time and cultures. And lastly, that it was for any kind of work, personal, professional, linear, associative, whatever. Here in part two, as we cover the next three qualities, we'll start to approach workflow more concretely. And as we walk closer to it, we'll begin to see truly just how expansive workflow is. Let's dive right in. Number 4, workflow is an art. What exactly do we mean by that? Well, we can better understand it by imagining kind of two phrases, or maybe the two applications of a phrase. So the phrase is, there is an art to blank. You fill in the blank. We could say that there's an art to public speaking, there's an art to communicating with somebody, to listening. Whatever we mean when we say there is an art to X or for X, that's what we mean by saying that there is an art for workflow. There's some sort of essential set of behaviors or principles that result in a thing being done well. We can flip this on its head and think of things that there is not an art to better, to pull out more clearly the meaning of this by means of contrast. So we could say that there is not an art to chewing bubble gum. I don't know. By that, though, we mean like there's no kind of universal right or wrong way about it. You just kind of put the stuff in there and move your mouth around, okay? We could also bring out a layer of meaning around that term, there's an art for workflow, by contrasting it with, say, science, though I don't mean to pose these things to like necessarily against each other. When we say that there is a science to something, or we say X is an art, not a science, we express something, and we express that while there is sort of recognized and universally known excellence in something, that excellence is not a result of a specific formula that can simply be downloaded and then, executed in some kind of macro or something like that, okay? So that's what we mean by art. We're talking about something that is essential, something that is refined, something that is universal. And an interesting outflow from this is that workflow itself is agnostic in many ways. It is tool agnostic. It is profession agnostic. You really are not talking here about a particular app or planner or anything like that, but you're talking about core behaviors. And actually, that's a fine transition to number 5. Number 5 is workflow is a behavioral framework. There's a really great interview between David Allen, John Forrester, by the way, John, if you see this, we should catch up, and Eric Mack. This was recorded in 2019, and the series, this 2-part series, is titled The Ultimate GTD App. And it really is not what you think it is. This was after the final GTD Summit. I think it was held in Amsterdam, and it was kind of like the last hoorah of David Allen before he kind of like capstoned his achievements. And at that summit, David Allen released to the world his kind of scribbled notes of what he was thinking design-wise for the making of the perfect GTD software. And ultimately, the conclusion of this podcast was that you can't really have, or maybe rather, it is a muse or a fool's kind of goal to try to seek the ultimate GTD software. You can disagree or agree with that assertion, but what I want to pull out was a story that Eric Mack shared in this podcast, which is quite insightful. There was a time early on in David Allen's career where he was using some sort of application on his computer for storing the information that he had externalized using his GTD methodology. And something happened. I don't know, he downloaded a thing or whatever, but all the data on his computer was completely wiped and there was no backup, or at least the backup wasn't accessible. And Eric had to break this news to David Allen. So he came into David's office and said, David, did you see what just happened on the server? And David said, no, what's going on? And he said, we just lost all our data. And one might think, and certainly Eric shares this in the interview, he was expecting David to freak out, like just straight lose it. But that's not what happened. David took a couple breaths, pivoted his chair around, found a stack of papers, and started writing notes down on those papers. And it was simply him translating, or sort of like letting back out from his mind the things that were externalized in that software. Now, what's the thing that we want to pull out from here? The thing that we want to pull out is that when we are studying workflow, or if we are trying to master workflow, we are trying to do something that is centered on the person, the individual, rather than any sort of tool or system. Workflow is a set of behaviors, not ideas, that is habituated, not downloaded, by a person, not an app. Number 6, workflow is paradoxical. Let's keep running with these little David Allen anecdotes. So there is a clip that you can find on YouTube of David Allen coaching some sort of, I think, celebrity in Europe. And this celebrity is kind of, the creative type, the one that's kind of running around, has different ideas, has this messy kind of way about things. Well, David Allen is sitting down and coaching this woman, and you can sense this tension in the room. Allen is really riding her hard and forcing her to look all these indecisions in her life in the eye and say yes or no to them, or maybe later to them. Out of this kind of frustration, the woman asks David, how often are you relaxed? Because she's obviously super stressed out in this moment. And David says, all the time. And she says,
all the time?
I'm Mr. Spontaneous, trust me. That's why I figured all this out.
But the system is everything but spontaneous.
In that moment, David says one of the most insightful things that he has said. I don't believe it ever. The essence of it is in his books, but I think it's maybe more powerful than anything in his book. And he says,
it is everything so I can be spontaneous.
It is everything so that I can be spontaneous. And that is a great story to sort of wrap this point in. Workflow is paradoxical. It is calculated so that we can be spontaneous. It is mechanical so that we can be personal. It is rigid so that we can be flexible. And its complexity, much like the insides of a watch, ultimately produces a simplicity.